So let's get started. We know that moving from little school to big school also comes with some really big changes. Maybe one of the biggest being all of those new people and potentially new friends that your young people will be surrounded by. As parents of primary school children, we often know all of their friends. We know all about what's going on in their days and who they're associating with. But as they enter secondary school, we can be left feeling a little bit in the dark with who they're spending most of their days with. We also now have slightly less control over who their friends are. However, it's okay to still want to know who is involved in their lives. Ongoing conversations about their new friends show that you care and will give you an insight into their world. It's also really important to know who they surround themselves with in order to be aware of any additional pressures that may come with this and to try and get to know what kind of influence their friends may be having on them, whether this be positive or maybe not so much. The friends they make in secondary school really could last a lifetime. So how can we support our young people in making and maintaining those positive friendships? Well, firstly, try and be supportive of their new friends, as long, of course, that they are positive friendships. Making friends is really, really difficult for our children and young people, and it's lovely that someone wants to be friends with your child. That must show all of those really lovely qualities that they have and you've nurtured throughout their life. Encouraging them to invite their friends over or go out with them can be really supportive to support that blossoming new friendship. But also do make sure to give them space. If and when you get to meet any new friends, try not to bombard the friend with all of those questions. Get to know them, yes, of course, but also give your young person space with their new friends. Think about how you might feel if every time your best mate popped around for a cup of tea, your child was sat in the room asking them all sorts of questions about their life. They may want to spend all evening in their bedroom with their door shut, and that absolutely is okay. Try not to worry about this. Privacy is something that they're starting to strive for now that they're growing up. Try and be non-judgmental. Try not to pass comment on their new friends, unless, of course, you are really worried about them. We know that making negative comments about their friends is never likely to have a positive outcome. Could result in them shutting down and not being open with you. But do make sure to be that secure base. If anything does go wrong, make sure that they know that they can come to you, whether that's for things like advice or something kind of more serious like bullying. Even though they're becoming teenagers, they still need you. We know that friendships require work, they require hard work, but something that we might take for granted now that we're adults and we've really navigated this journey of making friends. There's likely to be wobbles in their friendships, there's likely to be arguments, there's likely to be tears. This doesn't necessarily mean that their friends are bad people, just that they're also learning to navigate life. So be there for your young person when they need advice or just that shoulder to cry on. And finally, role model. It takes a lot of skills and hard work to maintain friendships. So show them how you're a good friend and how to be a good friend themselves too. Role model nurturing your own relationships, spending time with your friends, being supportive and forgiving where appropriate. So, your young person is now nice and settled into secondary school. They've made some new friends, they're entering puberty, and they're starting to find that independence. Any guesses as to what might come next? Relationships, of course, that wonderful world of teenage romance, first love, but also first breakups. I'm sure that we can all remember those. Throughout all of these sessions, you'll notice that we'll keep coming back to communication and having those open and those honest conversations. Relationships are especially important to discuss, and before they start entering into those relationships, if you can. Relationships can absolutely be the greatest joy, or they can be the greatest misery of our lives, and that includes our teenagers too. It's important that young people understand healthy relationships and what they may look like. TV shows can be a good starting point for this so that it doesn't feel too embarrassing or too uncomfortable for your child or for you. So after watching a video clip or programme on the TV, you could think about the following. Would they like to be treated in this way? Why or why not? What would they do in that scenario? What could the couple on the TV show do differently? And what qualities would they like to have in their partner? And if your child already does have a relationship, talk to them about it. Try and think about what you need to know. So you might need to know how they met or how old their partner is, but also show interest to encourage open discussions and making them aware that they can come to you if they need to. You could ask your child questions like, how do they treat you? What is it that you like best about them? And what do you like doing with them? Your young person really is likely to feel embarrassed being asked these questions, but that's okay. It's important that they understand that it's normal and fine to talk about their relationships openly and honestly with you. So I'm going to spend some time now talking about unhealthy and abusive relationships. So if this sounds like it may be a triggering subject for you, please do feel free to mute me and rejoin me in about 10 minutes' time. So we couldn't talk about this topic tonight without acknowledging how sad we feel about the recent incident in Croydon. Although we don't want to make any assumptions about what happened, it appears likely that the 17-year-old that was arrested was known to the 15-year-old victim. Although we're not talking about 15-year-olds tonight, we saw last week just how quickly our children turn into young adults. We're also aware that it's very likely that 10, 11 and 12-year-olds would have been on that bus. Remember to look after yourself when listening to these types of news stories, which are incredibly upsetting, and Emma and I felt deeply sad to hear of this news. However, unhealthy or toxic relationships are important to be aware of as parents, as our young people enter into romantic relationships. And this is because research shows that young people between the ages of 13 and 24 are at the highest risk of domestic abuse. 49% of boys and 33% of girls aged between 13 and 14 thought that hitting a partner would be okay in some scenarios. 25% of girls and 18% of boys aged between 13 and 17 years old reported having experienced some form of physical violence from an intimate partner. So just have a moment to think about those statistics. You'll notice that all of those statistics that I said all start with the age of 13, which hopefully your young person hasn't quite reached yet if you're here with us tonight. So the key here is prevention. Start having those open conversations now about how they deserve to be treated and how they should treat other people. It can be really, really easy to shy away from a subject like this, especially if we don't really know much about the area ourselves. So how can we start to talk about unhealthy relationships? Well, I think it's really important that we start with what domestic abuse actually is. So according to the legal definition of domestic abuse is defined as an incident or a pattern of incidents of controlling, coercive, threatening, degrading, or violent behaviour. So on your screen now, you will see the power and control wheel. So the power and control wheel shows all of the different ways that an abusive person may gain power and control in an intimate relationship. We feel that the power and control wheel can be a really good place to start kind of talking about this subject, especially for those older preteens, so kind of thinking about the ages of 11 and 12. The power and control wheel really shows young people that unhealthy or abusive relationships don't necessarily mean physical violence, which is often what can be commonly thought of when we say the words domestic abuse. The power and control wheel is in our toolkit, which you will get emailed a copy of after tonight's session, so don't worry too much about memorising section by section. I'm not going to go through every section now, but I just really want to highlight the most common areas that we might see within abusive teen relationships. So starting with using intimidation, which is at the top of the wheel, this means using scary behaviour. So behaviour that would leave someone feeling fearful, walking on eggshells, or maybe scared to put a foot wrong. So this can be something as simple as the way that they look at the other person to damaging property. So especially within our teenage relationships, we often see things being thrown at the wall or punches thrown at a wall. Then another common one that we see within our teenage relationships is isolation, just to the right on your screen. So in terms of young people's relationships, this will often involve them making the other partner feel bad about seeing their friends, for example. However, do try and remember that within teenage relationships, they often want to spend all of their time with their new partner. But isolation is very different here because there will be some level of fear involved. So the victim in the relationship would likely to feel scared as to what would happen if they didn't spend all of their time with their partner. Then we've got using coercion and threats. Coercive control only actually became a crime in 2015. It's obviously something that has always been around, but it involves more of a pattern of behaviours rather than one-off incidents. So the pattern normally results in the abusive behaviours getting worse and worse as time goes on and can really leave that victim to feel quite trapped. Commonly in young people's relationships, we may see a threat of suicide. So for example, if the victim was to end that relationship, then the abusive person may threaten to end their own life, which is obviously a huge pressure on that victim within the relationship. Other behaviours that we might see under kind of that banner of using coercion and threats might be making threats or carrying them out. And that might be the threat to send nude pictures, for example, or spread rumours about the other person. So the aim here really isn't to scare you, but just to inform you. Remember that according to those statistics that I started with, it's much more likely that your young person will enter a healthy relationship rather than an unhealthy one. But it is important that they are aware that those unhealthy relationships do exist and what they look like, so they can look out for these signs in their own future relationships. We discuss this will being kind of an important starting place for our older preteens and teens. So for our younger preteens, come back to those open-ended questions about relationships and linking it to a movie or a TV show if appropriate. And make sure that they're aware of how they should be treated and how they should treat